Welcome to another exciting episode of the Collecting to Destroy podcast. I'm your host, the Baxter of Puppets. Say your prayers, grip your pillow tight. This week we are traveling into the dream world to examine one of the most beloved and feared horror franchises of all time, A Nightmare on Elm Street. My guest today is a fellow horror aficionado. He's Hoffman, Hoff Machine, Ken Hoffman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, it's good to have you back. How you been?
I've been good, man. I've been good.
So, what's new? How's your Halloween decor coming along? I would assume it's up by now.
Yeah, I start putting it up October 1st, and I have a pretty decent amount done at that point, but I keep working on it for the next couple of weeks. I think I'm done now, dude. I've got a ton of hours into it at this point. So, you got to let it go as an artist at some point, and I've hit that threshold, I think.
How much of this is new versus like last year?
All the stuff by the front door is all repeats, all the stuff that I've built over the last couple of years. All the stuff at the end of the yard, which is the thrones. I basically made a king and queen for my, tribal skeleton theme. And, the way my yard wraps around the corner of the cul-de-sac, you get a good view from both angles of the street. So I felt like it was important for me to build something down there. So that was the focus this year. And, I started out with just a small idea and then obviously just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger because I'm way too into it and way too overzealous. But at this point, I'm done.
It looks like you've got a pretty defined theme too. It's kind of like a Cannibal Holocaust kind of style kingdom. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I describe it. More like it's like a 70s cannibal horror movie. I don't know if that was intentional at first. The first thing I did was just take some skeletons that I had bought, and then I corpsed them. I melt garbage bags that I buy from the dollar store, and then I paint them, and it kind of gives them this fleshy look. And it just looked very like Temple of Doom-ish to me, very Goonies-esque. And then I just incorporate some of the natural elements that are around my yard. Like I have this big, huge palm tree at the end of my yard. And when the palm fronds die, they brown out. And those what makes these cool looking wings that I add onto it. It just feels very tribal and, pretty gnarly to me. So I like to incorporate it into the decor because it just kind of flows with the rest of the look of the yard.
I really like the little, I don't know if you call her a girl or what, but
yeah,
I saw the video you posted on Sculpable. The video is great. And if anybody wants to check that out on the Sculpable Instagram,
Thanks,
you can
dude.
scope this stuff out. But that scares me, especially because it's kind of outside of the theme.
Well, it is. That was actually the first thing. I bought the house 4 years ago, so this is my fourth or my third Halloween actually, because we moved in about Christmas time 4 years ago. And the first year, I put all these tombstones. I made these tombstones out of foam, and then I made this girl. Her name is Isabel, and I put her on the front steps, and she looks real. And during the daytime, people would freak out thinking that there was a little girl sitting there. But at nighttime, when the lights are off and you just have a little bit of a spotlight giving her a little slight illumination, she's freaky, dude. And in my neighborhood, there's a lot of people who just regularly walk the sidewalks for, exercise. It's a nice neighborhood. People always think that she's real. And it's by far the creepiest part of the decor. It doesn't really go in with the rest of the skull tribal theme that I have developed over the last couple of years. And in fact, I think maybe I need to start walking away from all the tombstones that I have, but the yard's big enough where I still need just filler in between, everything right now. So.
Well, and I think having her in there because she is outside of the theme, I think it's even more effective because it feels like that is a person. Because if it was just another one of the, skeletons in your theme or a person dressed in your theme, it would just look like, oh, that's part of the decor. But you're like decor, Is that a real person?
Well, I have moved her a couple times. Like I said, the first time she was by the front door, and then I moved her. I had this bench in a different spot, and the neighborhood kids who come trick or treating, they were like, "Hey, where's that girl?" And I'm like, "Oh, she's over there now," you know. And they didn't see where I put her, like in this little nook. So then I was like, "I got to move her so she's more visible." But around the neighborhood, I'm starting to become known now. You know, the neighbors this year in particular, I did a lot of the work on the front lawn while I was building it on the lawn. Usually I build it like in the garage and bring it out, but a lot of the painting and setup was on the lawn live. So a lot of the neighbors like who were driving by stopped and talked to me to comment on it. Most of them to compliment on it. So I get a pretty good reception from the neighbors. I think most people appreciate it as opposed to being freaked out by it.
Yeah, I still think that you go with my suggestion, which is you just leave this up for the Christmas season now, and you just kind of put like Santa hats and elf outfits on everybody, and I'm sure the neighborhood would love it.
I've debated it. You know, when I moved in and the first time I did Halloween setup, my neighbor across the street, she was so amped. She came out. She was like, "Oh, do you decorate the yard for Christmas too?" And I really disappointed her in the fact that I didn't. So I thought maybe I'd throw her a bone this year and do something. But I think really that's what I should do. Just put some hats on these things and call it a day.
I always think that the California Christmas thing is weird to start with no snow. I mean, you coming from the East Coast, you know all about that. Like it's just I'm sure you adjust mentally to it eventually, but still it's kind of weird the thought of Christmas decorations but no snow on the ground.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because what I've realized that about like the Christmas spirit, when a neighborhood embraces all, you know, stringing up the lights together, that's when it really like kind of brings that spirit out and you get that whole vibe. And I have realized that a lot of my neighbors do Christmas lights. Like a lot more of them decorate for Christmas than they do for Halloween. And my house, based on the locale and how, like I said, it wraps this cul-de-sac, it's a very prominent part of a bend in the road. With me not putting the lights in it, I'm kind of like the Kill Buzz house at Christmas that doesn't participate. So I've come to realize that despite the lack of snow, you know, there is sort of this festival mood that you can have, particularly if there's like a group of houses that do, you know, decorate like that.
Awesome. Well, It looks awesome. I recommend everyone, again, go check out Sculpable on Instagram. Check out the video. It's cool to see your creative mind at work.
Thanks, dude.
But let's get things started here. So I'll start out with a brief synopsis. We're here to discuss Nightmare on Elm Street, which is a fairly large franchise spanning multiple decades. The very first film being released November 9th, 1984. The franchise in whole is 9 films in a 2-season, 44-episode TV series, novels and comic books. The supernatural horror series revolves around a fictional character, Freddy Krueger, a former child murderer / predator, who, after being burned alive by the vengeful parents of his victims, returns from the grave to terrorize and kill the teenage residents of Springwood, Ohio, in their dreams. After his death, the son of 100 maniacs, Freddy Krueger becomes a denizen of the dream world, a plane of existence where human subconscious thought takes place. While there, he has the ability to manipulate reality and affect unconscious humans as long as he is still remembered and feared in the real world. It should be noted that re-entering the physical plane leads to nothing but trouble for Freddy as he becomes susceptible to pain and even death. So with all that being said, Ken, when did you first see A Nightmare on Elm Street, and what are your earliest memories of the franchise?
You know, I feel like Freddy's always been a part of my life, but I don't know if there's like an actual moment where I remember being exposed to it the first time. And that's probably because, you know, the first one came out in 84. So I was 9, you know, and then they released one like every year after that. So the second one was 10 and the third one, I was 11. But I think it was the Dream Warriors that I saw first. It certainly was the movie that I remember the most, probably because like as an 11-year-old boy and you're sort of coming into manhood, you know, I remember like the nurse scene with Joey, and that was like such a big prominent part of my adolescence, you know? So like, I think that I was like super in love with the nurse. Just, I was like, oh my God. So that was the movie that I remember most prominently. And likely we rented the movie from the local video store. Like that was right before the big chains were prominent. So I don't think there was a Blockbuster. They had all, like in the 80s, it was all the mom and pop VHS stores. And the one in the town that I grew up in was called Video to Go. And I remember going there all the time. And there was two sections that I was always drawn to. It was the horror section and the martial arts section, or the kung fu section. I'm not sure what the vernacular was, how they dubbed it, but I always remember, you know, in that time, 80s horror was big, and like ninja flicks were big. So
Very big. Yeah.
I would always go, and, you know, at some point after harassing my mother over and over and over, I think she just gave up. And I think the first one on this franchise for me was Dream Warriors via rental from Video to Go.
Yeah, it's similar for me. Same thing. We didn't even have a video store at first. At first, it was our local grocery store was called Pick and Save. So my family would always get like Friday night family movie night. We'd go to Pick and View, which was, they called it Pick and View, and that was the VHS section up by the customer service desk where you could go through. I didn't grow up in a family that watched horror movies. So I didn't have much exposure to that. I also didn't have cable growing up. So I didn't have like that, I'm going to sneak off and I'm going to watch these scary movies. So similar to growing up in a household where you may grow up with like just all American basic food, steak and potatoes, kind of a family. I think that if you don't know that sushi exists, or there's these great exotic meals out there, you're just happy with what you have. So I wasn't like craving horror, and I didn't know I loved horror. So it wasn't until like my teens that I started finding horror and just digesting it and going through, you know, let's go watch all the Hellraiser movies in order. Let's watch all the Nightmare movies in order. Halloween, all of those. So the cool thing is that, like you said, you jumped in at number 3. For me, I'm jumping in at number 1 because by the time I'm jumping in, they're way down the line of these movies. I just remember, though, the things that stood out were the uniqueness of the plot, the Freddy character. Like there was no other horror character like that. All the others were very silent, or just not that Freddy's not violent, but most of them were just based on violence, like slasher, like much more slasher. Like,
well, there was a style to Freddy and a creativity to Freddy and a Nightmare on Elm Street that the other movies didn't have. And, you know, that's why it really sort of set itself as, you know, it was so unique in that world of 80s horror. And look, 80s horror, just as a general statement, is phenomenal because it introduced us to so many characters that became now consistent like monsters of lore. You know, like before the 80s, you had like your classics: Frankenstein, Dracula, werewolf, mummy, you know, King Kong, Godzilla. Like that was it. And then you know, in the late 70s, you started to get some cool things: Leatherface, Michael Myers, and then Jason. But they were like all masked and they were all silent. And Freddy comes out and it's like, you see his face, he's got a personality, he's got a wit, he's got a sarcasm, and there's a lot of style to how the movies are directed, the kill scenes, everything else. So I think it just literally takes on a life of its own. And then that's exactly why there has so much staying power. But I don't think that I didn't want to suggest that my mother was watching horror movies with me from the VHS. So I think like you know, I remember, I think occasionally she'd let me get one, but it was like in middle school and high school, when I started going to comic book shows, collecting comics. The comic and horror scene always crossed over. So going to shows like that, you're way more exposed to it. And I think it was sort of the same thing. Once I got into it, then you go through the backlog and you know, kind of just eat as much as you can that you hadn't seen previously.
Well, and I think like the concept, which kids now will never understand, is going to the video store, and then it went from Pick and View to there was a place in Germantown called Video Update. So that was the bigger video store, but still it's an independent, and then eventually Blockbuster for me. But the artwork on the VHS covers, like that's the thing. I think of like Jason Goes to Hell, like that cover stands out. I never rented it at that time, but or even just seeing Pinhead, like that as like a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, that like burns images in your mind. You don't know what the movie's about, and you assume it's so terrifying that you'll die if you watch it.
I know,
but
I love the 80s for that reason. It's such a visual decade because the technology is starting to develop, but it's not so amazing and awesome where there's so much shit thrown at you. There's still a mystery to everything. We've covered this in other podcasts when we talk about the artwork of heavy metal and going through the record store and you look at the vinyl cover and you don't know what it is, but you're intrigued by the artwork and you're like, I need to listen to this because this looks so cool. What is this? And VHS was the same way. Like if you didn't know what a title was, you'd just see the movie poster or you'd see the cover of it. I remember specifically in the horror section, like Faces of Death. What is this? What is this title? What is this cover? There's something ominous. I think there was an aura about this movie that I think you had to be 18 to rent it. And at the time it was like the 7 real life deaths that were captured on VHS were then compiled onto this movie. That's what Faces of Death was. It was like a guy who got eaten by a crocodile, some other. Now it's like all over YouTube and like the regular news. Faces of Death is every day now, but back then it was a big deal. And the mystery of it was because there wasn't really a lot of information. The aura was so like, it was built up, and that was just an exciting time to live, because you just experience things in such a visceral way that, I'm trying to teach my son that, like there's other ways to look at things. Don't just, touch screen all the time. And, the technology that he's just immediately born with in the world has sort of taken, I think, some of the romance away. But that decade in particular, because of all these, the music, the movies, the television that was coming out, man, there was still this energy because of the mystery of it that you don't have any longer.
Yeah. And almost the same cover, you go to 10 different video stores, it's the same cover in every store. Mm-hmm. Right now you go on demand and you try to find a movie and they might have 50 different versions of artwork that they're using to sell this movie. Yeah. The same way with like vinyl LPs, those images would burn in your mind because they would be a repetitive single image that represents that one thing. And even now, going back and trying to find some cool cult horror movies, I judge a lot of it of what I'm going to go tune into on is that, look at that artwork for the poster from 1985. Is it worthy of me checking out? And sometimes it is, and sometimes you're tricked. But
that seems like a dying art, like the movie poster. Like very rarely now do you see like an image for a new movie that comes out. You're like, dude, I need to have that framed on my wall, But, there are classic movie posters that are just like you're wearing the Exorcist shirt, like, the cover, the movie poster, with the priest in the shadows standing outside the house is like classic image.
Yeah.
And, that's sort of a dying art now, which is really unfortunate.
One of our listeners writes in, that's how I ended up renting Thumb Wars, a parody of Star Wars where all the characters were played by thumbs from Video Update. Great artwork.
I have no idea what Thumb Wars is, but
it sounds like Jacob might enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into our next segment here. That sound, ladies and gentlemen, means it's time for the ranking. Today, Ken and I will be ranking each of our top 5 films in the A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. I'll run through my list 5 through 1, followed by yours, Ken. Mm-hmm. And then the debate and discussion shall commence, starting with our number 1s and working backwards from there.
Okay.
Give you a little time to digest.
Interesting. Okay. Well, why don't you read your 1 through 5?
Yep. So I'll go through both of our lists here.
All right.
So at number 5, I have Part 4 Dream Master. Number 4, I have Part 5 Dream Child. Number 3, I have Part 2 Freddy's Revenge. Number 2, I have Part 3 Dream Warriors. And number 1, I have the first film, A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay.
On your list, Ken, you have number 5 as Part 5 Dream Child. Number 4, Freddy versus Jason. Number 3, Part 4 Dream Master. Number 2 is the first film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. And your number 1 pick was Part 3 Dream Warriors.
Yeah.
So Ken, you want to kick it off with your number 1 pick, Dream Warriors?
Yeah. I'm going to premise this in saying that I could have easily put the first one first and Dream Warriors second.
Yes.
For different reasons, it kicked off the franchise, et cetera, et cetera. But I'll get into why I didn't choose that one when we talk about number 2. But Part 3 to me is the complete movie. So the acting is the best out of all of the franchises. The CGI is the best out of all the franchises. The story is the best story. The kills are the best kills, visually, stylistically. And you also start to get a little of a backstory on Freddy that you didn't know previously when they tell you about Amanda Kruger and he's the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Now you're like, oh, now we're getting somewhere, like all the things you needed to know about him that you didn't know previously all come together in this film. You get the return of Heather Langenkamp as Nancy, her dad, John Saxon, all the heavy hitters from the first film, are back. So it's really it's the sequel, but, throwing in Part 2 in the middle, they like to sort of crap it out a little bit. So it builds it up even. So that's sort of another thing, is because Part 2, I think, was really so bad that, Part 3's glorious return to the heyday is, just establish it's right back up as a great franchise again. But, very easily could have been the first one, because the first one really establishes the character, and so much, without that first one and the brilliance of it, you don't have the franchise. But I think the things I just mentioned, the CGI is perfect in this movie, and there's some cheesiness in the first one. That's really kind of the reason, I think. That's why I rank it this way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say the exact same thing. With my number 1 and 2, which are the same thing. It's the first movie and the third movie. And I think that's a pretty big consensus that those are the best 2 of the entire franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I picked number 1 because this is a common theme for me. I feel like when I'm ranking things, this started it all. It set it all up.
Yeah.
Introduction of this great character, this creative gore that you hadn't seen before. The concept of the movie is established here again. So even though it's in all the movies, it was very psychological in the sense that, like, as a viewer, you can imagine what it would be like trying to stay awake, having your parents not believe you. You almost feel tired watching it when you just see how tired they are. The kids in the first one, and that goes, I think, probably in the third one too. They're very likable, innocent, normal kids.
Mm-hmm.
The movie right away starts out with the fabrication of the glove.
I love that opening scene. Yeah.
Introduction of the theme. The score is introduced right there, that synth score. And I mean, I know we're both huge fans of that score, and that sets everything to come. The logo is amazing. Title screen.
It's tough. Like, you're splitting hairs picking between the two. Everything you just said, totally on point. I love the opening scene. I love that you get to see him making the glove. That's the intro right away. And in the first 5 minutes, you get that little doon, 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 doon. And then you get the nursery rhyme, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, which are just amazing. I mean, really. So for me, there's 2 minor things that when I really had to figure out how to rank these, the scene right before Tina gets killed and Freddy's walking down the alleyway and his arms stretch really long and he's like scraping the sides of the walls. It's a little cheesy looking to me, you know?
Yeah.
And at the end, when Nancy's mom gets like pulled through the window of the door, it's very obvious it's a inflatable doll. It almost destroys that movie for me. So for those two reasons, that's why I rank that one number 2 instead of number 1.
Yeah, Freddy isn't fully realized in the first movie. Like,
Right.
The personality doesn't come through yet.
Yeah.
It's a little darker, I would say, like less humorous, less personality. I was very excited. You know, John Saxon's in it. He's the dad. Loved him in Bruce Lee flicks and other movies. Like, what a great actor.
Yeah.
The iconic tongue lick photo, the phone scene with the tongue, like it burns images in your mind. And the last thing I'll say is the first Nightmare movie is the original Home Alone. Like,
I know, you know, that's really funny with all the booby traps that Nancy sets in the house. Totally.
Yes. Like before Home Alone was a thing, there was a Nightmare on Elm Street, and Nancy is setting up all those traps.
He's got the tripwire, like fire bombs, and like the sledgehammer that comes swinging from the door into his gut, you know. But also, too, I mean, the first movie establishes certain rules too that then are, consistently shown throughout the rest of the movie. You know, like if you die and you sleep, you know, you die for real. And, you know, Freddy has no space and time limitation. You know, he can kind of do whatever he wants. And really, he has been killed, many times, even when you pull him out of the dreams into the mortal world. But really, the only way to sort of defeat him is to like no longer fear him and basically say that to him. Like, I take back all the energy I gave you, I think is what Nancy says at the end. And like he disappears through her and he's in the real world. Like he pulled her out of the dream. So it establishes so much that that movie very easily is, you know, it's the first movie. It's the best movie. Yeah. You know, Dream Warriors, basically because I fell in love with the nurse, you know, that's, you know, as an 11-year-old kid, you know.
So did the actor that played Joey, right? His name was Joey?
Joey, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joey. He said that in a documentary I've seen that he also had his awakening with that. The last thing I'll say about the first movie, and this is just personal opinion, and we'll get to this later when we talk about character deaths.
Yeah.
My favorite 2 character deaths in the whole series are in that, which are Glenn and Tina.
Totally.
We'll talk specifics about that later.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're less creative, but comparative to deaths that come in the series. But like to see that for the first time is outrageous, and it's really cool practical effects. Like,
great.
Great stuff.
In those 2 movies are phenomenal how they handled them. And that's what I really appreciate about 80s horror movie in general. It was like right before CGI. So they put a lot of effort into, you know, puppeteering and FX and stop motion animation, like all the things, all the tricks that they were doing before they just started rendering everything graphically. Really, like the Nightmare franchise pushed a lot of those boundaries and developed a lot of that stuff. And in part 3, like what the Freddy snake worm thing that comes out of the floor and eats Kristen is phenomenal. Like the big phallic worm, it's awesome. It's so awesome, you know. So truthfully, that was the reason why I chose it slightly over the first one, was because I thought the arm stretch was a little cheese, and then the inflatable doll mom at the end. I'm like, dude, that's how you ended this movie. So, get a better doll.
The whole ending at the end felt a little rushed and a little weird in general. So your number 2 was the first movie. We've kind of been commenting on both of them back and forth. Anything else you want to add about the first movie as your number 2 pick?
No, I think we covered it. You know, what I just found interesting about the first Nightmare is that, you know, Wes Craven these are the movies that really established Wes Craven as like the master of horror. But very clearly to me, I think he's a horror fan and he's giving nods to it. So I've never read or seen anything that approve this statement or validated this statement rather, but the car that Glenn was driving in A Nightmare on Elm Street was a 1958 Cadillac Series 2. And Christine, he is a Stephen King fan. Stephen King's Christine is a 58 Plymouth Fury. The vehicles look like so similar. And Christine the book came out in 83, and then John Carpenter's version of the movie also came out in 83. But I feel like there's a nod to that with that car. It has to be sort of an homage to it. So I sort of appreciate these nuggets of horror movie homages that Wes Craven has started to put into those movies, starting with the first one. And that he does do that through the rest of the franchise, I've noticed.
Another listener writes in, the end of the first one is so good. How dare you, Ken?
It is. It's great, but it's a little cheese. You have to admit that the mom, like her legs are stiff when she gets pulled through the window. And if you've ever been pulled through a window, your legs aren't going to be stiff like that. So they very easily could have gotten like a more realistic dummy to pull through the window. That's all I'm saying. When you have to split hairs and you have to choose between one or the other, you have to find a reason. That's my reason.
All right. So for my number 2, I have Dream Warriors, which again was your number 1 pick. The only things I want to add to that is there's a quote in the beginning of the film, "Sleep, those little slices of death, how I loathe them," by Edgar Allan Poe. That really speaks to me, like, not to be cheesy, but like, I'm not a fan of sleep. Like, it's a necessity in this world.
Right.
But I don't like this whole idea of like, where do we go? We're gone. Like, you're gone out of consciousness. And so I kind of related to that concept of little slices of death. Paper mache house, pretty cool in the beginning. I love the tie into the music video with a lot of things like this. It's not just the film, but it's like, how does it affect pop culture in general?
Right.
The actors are incredible. Like, Patricia Arquette is great as Kristen Parker, and Ken Sagos as Kincaid. Like, Kincaid is such a lovable character.
Yeah.
Great. And the doctor jokes at one point in the film about the theory about the suicides, that somebody had said it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And Larry Fishburne, not yet Lawrence,
right?
He plays an orderly, and he laughs it off, and he states that's what keeps people alive. And I'm thinking, like, that's right. Like, people like to blame heavy metal for suicides and murder and everything. But honestly, music is what keeps people from going off the deep end. It's a release. It's a way to express themselves.
There was certainly a lot of subtext that he put in those movies. So 1 and 3 are also the only franchise ones that Wes Craven directed until A New Nightmare. So the rest of the franchise were different directors. And I think it's obvious, it shows. But he was really good at really developing sort of these underlying stories and these underlying subtexts that are there. And a lot of the ones you just mentioned too, but it's, it's great to see that franchise is able to sort of carry that on throughout all of the movies, and, have these little, obvious rules and these themes that keep recurring and showing, because it gives characters more depth. What I think is also really interesting and fascinating, why do horror movies seem to launch the careers of like a lot of like great actors? Johnny Depp's first movie, Patricia Arquette's first movie. Was that Lawrence Fishburne's first movie? I don't know, but he was certainly a young guy. Kevin Bacon in Friday the 13th. It's like, it's just a sort of this strange phenomenon that it happens that way.
One thing that I had looked up on my own after hearing that line about music keeping people alive and blaming sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I was kind of thinking, when did this movie come out? Because it comes out in 1987.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, when did the PMRC form, which actually was in 1985. So 2 years before this movie came out. So probably in the writing process of this film, PMRC is hitting all the news lines. They're blaming Judas Priest for people committing suicide. Very relevant at the time to talk about. And So kind of interesting, like you had mentioned, to see that subtext come across.
Mm-hmm.
One of our listeners wrote in Dream Warriors, Dockin', Rockin'. And I agree with that. I love it.
I do love the horror movie heavy metal crossover. That's real easy to do. I wish sometimes it's done a little bit better. I'm not a huge Dokken guy. Not to take anything away from George Lynch, but
missing out.
There's like, I mean, how do they choose Dokken? Because like nobody else was affordable, I guess. I don't know what the real reason is, but out of 80s, like all the awesome metal that's coming out of the 80s, like Dokken's the band that you go to.
Yeah, one of the biggest bands at the time. Just saying.
I don't know, man. It's at the time that I'm surprised they didn't choose like Poison, But thank God they didn't do that. At least Dokken's got a little grit to it.
I think Poison would show up on the Friday the 13th soundtrack more than the Nightmare. That's something that has gone away. Is like it used to be horror movie comes out and soundtrack comes out with no songs that are featured in the film.
Yeah.
They're just awesome ripping metal songs. I think the last soundtrack that I bought like that, which was just a blazing, was soundtrack was the Bride of Chucky soundtrack. had like Typo Negative, right. Bruce Dickinson, Static X. Like it was like a killer soundtrack. And you just don't get that as much nowadays.
Yeah, I can't. It's a good point. I can't even really think of a movie that recently where I'm like, oh wow, the soundtrack to that is really good. Regardless of the genre. Like I remember the 2 CD or the 2 CD Forrest Gump compilation soundtrack is phenomenal. The Pulp Fiction soundtrack is phenomenal. Judgment Night, that first like metal rap crossover, like it's all great stuff. It's very rare that you see that. But then, like Tiffany's favorite album, like she loves the Garden State soundtrack and it's great, so it's unfortunate is it a budget thing? I don't know. Getting bands to write songs specifically for these albums or just, paying them the royalties to use their existing material. And I don't know, enough about how that works to comment on it accurately, but it's a shame that you don't really have that anymore. But like then, like when they wrote Dokken and Roth wrote the song specifically for it, and then there was the music video, and like, the album cover, there was so much tie-in, like you don't ever see anything like that anymore.
Yeah. And you mentioned Judgment Night. I think I kind of missed that album, but the same concept was the Spawn soundtrack.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like you're pairing up these artists to do original material.
Yeah.
Like you said, just for these soundtracks. And that was a big part of my life, was that album. I'm still looking for it on vinyl, which I know exists. Right, so let's keep this moving. I think that our next 3 picks, each of us, is going to go a lot quicker than the first 2.
Yeah.
Since the first 2 basically is the franchise, and then everything that comes off of that just kind of expands upon the mythos. So number 3, you have Part 4, Dream Master. You want to touch on that?
Yeah. The unfortunate thing, I think, is that the drop off after the 3rd movie is pretty significant. And it really, and actually, like, you've got Part 2 in here. I think 2 is pretty bad, but so really there's only 2 movies that I would say out of this franchise are really good. Everything else, and by really good I mean have this a majority of the franchise, the majority of the movie is enjoyable. The rest of the movies, I think, have like snippets of good things, a scene, a kill, a dialogue, something like that. But the drop off is so steep after the first 2 that we ranked that it was really hard for me to put these in order. So I chose the Dream Master, even though I hate when they change actresses. So Patricia Arquette is out, but Kristen is back. I hate that. But basically, I put Part 4 in because there is still 2 pretty awesome death scenes in this movie, which is Sheila. That's when she's sitting in class and Freddy's like, want to suck face, and he like, kisses her, and like sucks her into this like California raisin. I love that scene. And then the other scene was when Debbie she's like the 80s workout chick, and she's working out and she's on the bench press, and Freddy pushes her down and breaks her arms, and she transforms into the cockroach and he crushes her. And a great scene. So those two scenes alone sort of saved the movie and put it in this ranking for me. Otherwise, I don't think the movie's that great, and I don't think the rest of the movies in the franchise are that great, except for, like I said, in these just small little pieces that you find, so that's why I've got that there.
Yeah, and my number 3, which does not appear on your list, is Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, which maybe not the biggest pick there, but for the same reasons you're saying, which is like specific scenes. So the way the movie starts, the bus scene, when it opens, like right there is like, that's pretty good. Like quintessential Freddy Krueger nightmare material. And that's the kind of stuff you can imagine as a kid happening to you.
Totally.
In your dreams. I like the idea that Jesse Walsh's family moves into Nancy's house. It's still got the bars on the windows. They find Nancy's diary. There's a lot of really cheeseball stuff in there, like the Fu Manchu cereal with the little fingers, which makes Jesse remember his nightmare.
What, the exploding parakeet is not, their favorite scene in that movie?
No. And then, I mean, the big part that people talk about with this is the homosexuality subtext to the film, which is one of those things that I think a lot of people, including myself, first time you see that, you don't think about it.
Right.
And then you go back after, the movie's been so talked about, and it's like, oh, geez, it hits you in the face. Like, it's characteristic, though, of the franchise to discuss things that real teenagers are dealing with.
Yeah.
And these kind of like taboos that your parents put in front of you. You've the producer of the series playing the bartender at Don's bar, and just interesting stuff. The last thing that I did enjoy about it was the showdown at the power plant. I thought that was kind of a cool scene.
It has its moments. I think for when you come out with as the reason why I don't rank it though is because it's the second movie. And if that was like the fifth movie, I'd say, okay, this is not a bad fifth movie. But after coming out of the original, like gangbusters, you followed up with that sequel, which has no really notable death scenes. Like when you have the 2 kills that you have in the first movie, which are so memorable, and then there's no death scenes in the second movie. When they pull Freddy out at like the pool party and all the kids are running around and Freddy like jumps around, he's like, rah, and he grabs the lawn chair and he like flings it. I'm like, this is awful. This is the worst, So if you just look at it from a horror movie perspective, it was not a good sequel to like a great first movie. If you look at it as a study on how to insert a homoerotic subtext into a movie, it's a great movie. And in fact, like European culture, which is way more progressive in terms of their sexuality than Americans are, that movie was a huge box office success as opposed to its US success. So interesting how cultures like perceive things and react to them. But like you mentioned, I do think that what's great about that movie is that Freddy always did sort of push that boundary. There is always this sexual tension that's there deliberately. And the new writers and producers and directors of that movie keep it going, this time in a homoerotic way, which is very, very blatant once you see it. Down to the no girls allowed sign on his bedroom door. It's pretty blatant, which I think is actually pretty brilliant when you analyze it later on. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ranking horror movies. So, all that aside, it's a pretty poor sequel that when I look at what makes Freddy cool, what makes a Freddy movie cool, it's like cool, interesting death scenes, stylized stuff, great story. That one to me just sort of falls flat.
Yeah, I think 3 course corrects and keeps the franchise alive. If 2 had kept going on that trajectory, it would have been over.
And that's why I ranked the third one as number one, because it really fixed it. It was the third movie was the sequel that you were supposed to have.
So I'm pretty surprised to see that your number 4 pick is Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah.
Hit me with it.
Just pure kitsch, man. Like, you know, I think the idea of Freddy versus Jason was so big and so talked about for so long that it's just cool. And as being a huge fan of both franchises, it was just cool to see them up on the screen at the same time. Even if it was, you know, not a great movie. Could it have been done better? Yeah. But as fans of both franchises, is there anything cooler than seeing like your two faves going head to head like that? So, you know, again, this just sort of relates to this whole franchise. Just after the first top two falls so flat that this one gets up there just for like pure, hey, that's cool to see these guys sharing the screen together. That's really the reason.
Yeah, it was talked about for so long.
Yeah.
It was like it was never going to happen. And my number 4, I had Part 5, Dream Child, and I picked Part 5 over Part 4, which is my 5th pick, because of the whole origins portion that adds to the whole overall story.
Right.
I loved seeing the insane asylum with all the maniacs in it and the nun getting locked in there, and you see that Robert Englund is one of them in the mix.
Totally.
I thought that was great. The Son of 100 Maniacs. I liked the Greta's fancy dinner, the overfeeding death scene. The MC Escher stairs sequence was cool, and the maniacs like tearing Freddy apart. Just thought it was a fun addition. But I think the main part again is that it was expanding the overall story. Anytime you can do that, I'm a fan of like peeling back the curtain a little bit more to know a little bit more.
Right. Yeah, I really crave the backstory of Freddy more than I realize and when I'm watching those movies. So that's why I've got Dream Child as my 5th pick, basically for like the rape scene. You know what I mean? When you see Amanda Kruger locked in the asylum and you see Robert Englund is like the main maniac and you get to see him on, no makeup on. But that goes back to my comment earlier where like, there's like a scene in these movies that make it good. And in the rest of the movie, you're like, oh God, the Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare, that movie's terrible, except you get to see, Freddy's daughter and his wife, and his daughter goes into his like man cave torture basement. And you see like all his prototype gloves before he has like his fingers. Like there's like one that's got like spikes on the knuckles and like he's got all these different things. What a great scene, I'd love to see that expanded on. It's almost like if you cut that scene out and you cut the Amanda Kruger rape scene out and you cut out the origin stories and you put them all in together to make another movie, you get a really cool Freddy origin movie that would be pretty neat to see, So
they'll do it eventually, Ken.
Well, you can't because Robert Englund's too old now. So
I do think that's the cool thing that they do in reboots where they look at an overall history that's been painted.
Yeah. And
they take the parts that were like garbage parts and they get rid of them and they just use the parts that are considered canon. So my number 5 was Part 4, Dream Master, which was your number 3. Great flick. It's kind of, to me, Dream Child and Dream Master, they could almost be one movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of one continuing story. I thought it was cool Kincaid and Joey return in the beginning of it, even though they both die. But the Joey waterbed scene is really cool. Like that whole concept. I also enjoyed
naked girl Joey. Like he gets all the naked girls in the franchise, it seems,
Allison Dan being stuck in the time loop was really cool.
Yeah.
Because again, that's like a realistic nightmare sequence that would happen in your dream where you just keep reliving something over and over and over again. And you can't get to wherever you're trying to get. And you don't know where you're trying to get, but you can't get there. And then I had also noted like the deaths in that movie are killer.
I
so.
dig the little meatball scene, like all the little faces of all their friends on the meatballs, and Freddy's just like,
Oh yeah,
eating it. And that's why that franchise is so cool, is for stuff like that like Jason can't do, that Michael Myers can't do. You can't have Craven's really good at putting comedy and dark satire and humor into his movies along with horror. And that's just a fun place to be. Not a lot of movies get to do that. So really, Freddy has the most fun out of anybody ever. So all those movies show it. I just wish that they'd show it like consistently from start to finish and have an awesome movie instead of just an awesome scene.
You know what that sound means? It's time to head into the pit. In this segment, we pit two or more things against each other in the ultimate fight to the death. In this week's Into the Pit, we have a face-off between two long-awaited, highly anticipated crossover films in 2003's Freddy vs. Jason and 2004's Alien vs. Predator. Ken, your thoughts? And we're comparing the movies at this point.
Right. Can I tell you that I have struggled with this since we talked about doing it. And in fact, as I'm sitting here talking to you right now, I'm not 100% sure which one is the better movie, because they're both disappointing for a lot of reasons. So yes. I think I would like you to lead this conversation, and you tell me if you have a definitive answer. Maybe through our discussion, I can come to a slight edge one way or other. I am teetering on, I can't tell you. It basically depends on what day you ask me which movie's better and or which one's worse, So you tell me your thoughts, and then let's see if that sways my decision.
All right. So as you said, for the record, I think these are both terrible movies.
Yes.
I think they're very defined by the era in which they came out. So I think if these same movies were made now, there would be people in charge of them would be actual fans of these franchises, instead of like, let's get this hot director.
Hopefully,
it's all also it's when everybody was just thinking about the blockbuster. How do we make a blockbuster instead of making a quality film like Marvel does, where they don't care about making a blockbuster.
Right.
They're going to give the fans what they want, and the blockbuster is going to follow.
Yeah.
So, Freddy versus Jason. You start out with a greatest hits montage, kind of cheesy, not for us because we've seen all these movies.
Don't need the backstory, right?
You know that they're just doing this for people who are blindly going to see this movie because it's this blockbuster movie. Bad plot. You don't like the characters in the movie. Like, the kids in the movie are unlikable. So unlike the successful movies in the franchises, you feel bad for the kids because they're good kids. Even if they're participating in bad things, you still are like, oh my God, that person's dead. In this one, I want everybody to die. Just kill them all. You've got this weird Jay and Silent Bob Jay ripoff character that is so blatantly obvious that that's who they are ripping off.
Right.
And the battle between the two characters is completely unfulfilling. Like, when I actually saw them fighting on screen, I actually felt like Freddy was messing with a mentally disabled kid. Like, it didn't seem right. I mean, I know that I've seen a lot of things that say that Jason's probably on the spectrum. And now you're taking two people with totally different styles of warfare. You have this guy that his whole thing is psychological, and you're pitting him up against a guy who all he knows how to do is murder.
Right.
So, they're both very powerful characters, but it was just unfulfilling to me. And then the ending of the movie, they made it about the kids instead of making it about Jason and Freddy, which I didn't like. So transitioning over now to Alien versus Predator. This one, I thought they had good casting. Lance Henriksen from Millennium and X-Files. You got Ewan Bremner, the famous Scottish actor from Trainspotting. And then I thought the male and female leads were not annoying to me. Like, I thought they were likable characters. There were some things that were odd, like every 10 minutes the pyramid reconfigures, which was a ripoff of Cube.
Right.
Um, and but I did like the actual fighting between the predators and the xenomorphs. Like that was like quality. I didn't feel
Well,
like anything.
I hear it. I think well, so this is clearly your choice then, I think. And I agree with everything you say sort of about the first one. There was some moments in the first one or the Freddy versus Jason that were sort of gratifying. I mean, you know, Jason takes the kid's head in the cornfield and like spins it around backwards and like throws the, burning spear through his chest. Entertaining, I think it's funny that Freddy's trying to kill these kids, but like Jason beats him to the punch every time. And that's basically why Freddy gets pissed off is he's like, hey, these are my kids. I'm supposed to kill them, not you. So, okay. I mean, this is a tough movie to write, I think. Alien versus Predator, though, is done better, but there's just nothing unique about it. Like, okay, we get it. It's a training ground for the predators, and that's why they bring the aliens here, and they need the humans to impregnate them. Okay. This is the same story from every other movie in both of those franchises. I guess maybe that's what makes it good, is that it's consistent with all the other plots, but fight scenes alone, like, every kill that you see, it's the exact same kill that you see in every movie. So the only thing I thought was kind of cool was that like the kill at the end when the main predator kills the mother alien, and he does like that kind of jump and stabs her with the spear. Like it was a pretty cool move. I'm like, that's cool. But aren't predators like solo hunters? Would he really team up with like, some human chick?
No, I liked the historical context, like you said, about the training ground and tying in the three cultures and explaining why the Mayan civilization disappeared. So it's like, oh, this is like giving us some intelligent stuff. But then they're like, here, we're just going to give you all the predator weapons, humans.
Right.
And then, like you said, the unlikely team up. Why would the predator let her live? Why wouldn't he just be like, one swipe, she's dead. Right. Why would he fashion her weapons?
Right.
What benefit is that weak human to that predator? It breaks canon. Like why in every other movie are predators killing every single human, and in this movie they're gonna team up?
Yeah. So I think that this movie, AVP tries to take itself too seriously, or it takes itself more seriously than Freddy versus Jason does. Freddy, it sticks with that. Freddy's fun, doesn't give a shit. It's just a marquee lineup. It's your monster mashup that you wanted to see. Both movies were super hyped, but I wanted to see both of these guys clash. AVP was a comic book way before it was a movie. The Dark Horse comics, I've actually got them when I recently got my old comics back from my mother's house. And I found the limited, 4 series. I still have them, which was cool. I think the movie tries to take itself too seriously. And at first I thought that was a good thing because they're trying. And then I thought, well, you know what? Actually, it's not a good thing because it failed. So I think my decision is going to be Freddy versus Jason, just because it takes itself lighter. And what I think too is I think the fight scene is pretty good at the end between them. I love that, like, Freddy takes Jason's machete and cuts Jason's hand off. I love that he rips like Freddy's arm off and he no longer has the glove and he stabs him with his own glove. I love that they're using their own weapons against each other. And basically both the guys are like limbless at the end of the fight and then they get blown up. I mean, I wish there was a better ending as well, but I mean, how do you end that? You know what I mean? Those guys never die. They never die.
I know that they talked about one of the plots was to take this to hell, and I think that would have been the
Pinhead scenario.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like the Pinhead scenario is cool of him coming out, but even if you take him out, just the fact that they wouldn't be battling on Earth and that maybe it ends in hell, I think that would have been a cooler ending.
Have you ever seen any director though, like make a set of hell that looks good and believable? What would that be? You know what I mean? Some fire pits on the ground, So that's probably not a good idea to try to replicate that. That would have fallen even worse. So look, the reality is both movies are pretty disappointing considering how big of a franchise all of these characters are, you know, like you're right. You need to give this to Jon Favreau and say, hey, do the Avengers, like what you did to Avengers, do this, you know?
Yeah, they need to like do a qualified expanded universe,
Mhm.
not just that. You had to lay more groundwork, I think. You you know, they kind of did that with Jason Goes to Hell with the like grabbing the hat or whatever at the end of the movie. But like, I'm saying like have a guest appearance somehow Predator, Alien, they show up in one of their movies first to kind of establish a relationship.
Well, they did in Alien 2, in Predator 2, the alien skull is on the wall of the ship, the vertebrae in the
Sure.
skull. So it's there. But you know,
The benefit to both of these, the silver lining is that horror, like everything else, should be inclusive, and these are good gateway films for kids or adults to maybe say, "Oh, maybe I should check out this movie from 1987 called Dream Warriors." You
right,
know, like,
right.
and then you're gonna have like this horror awakening where you're like, "Why did I like Freddy versus Jason?" Like that's the thing with most films that come out. Some people saw Star Wars: The Phantom Menace first, and that led them to actual Star Wars. So it just depends when you're born and what your first exposure is and what maybe you saw in the theater. People pay attention more in the theater than they do in their home. Like, so maybe they went and saw this movie, and the next thing you know, you're fully immersed in all 9 films. And so with that being said, Alien vs. Predator was less offensive to me. So I'm picking that one. You're going Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah, I think so. I think after.
All right. So I think we should get into talking about the masters of horror that brought us these great nightmare films. And we're going to start with the man, Wes Craven.
Give homage to the legends.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you know, what I think is cool about Wes Craven is that he was dedicated to his craft. Like, I think that every movie that he made was a horror movie, with the exception of like one. You know, what's interesting is he tried, I think, after his first movie, Last House on the Left. I think he tried to, because it was so violent and so ill received, that he tried to get out of making horror movies, but he had already sort of established himself as like, he had a stigma, like he was that guy, and he couldn't get any other gigs any other way. So very clearly he became like the master of horror, like after his first movie, you know, even if he wasn't dubbed that until later, you know?
Yeah, he's definitely a genius, a visionary, and a pioneer when it comes to horror. And I think that horror is held on a higher platform now than it was back then. So, but I think his undeniable success with The Last House on the Left in 1977, and before that, even The Hills Have Eyes in 72. Like you,
other way
it's hard
around.
to deny with
72 is The Last House on the Left, and 77 is The Hills Have Eyes.
Okay, so I had him backwards, but yeah, the success of those and the amount of money they made and stuff like that, it's hard to turn down job opportunities. And I think when he started working on the Elm Street franchise, he wanted to kind of like change things, you know, and he did. He definitely did step out of what was current at the time. We talked about this character who has a voice. He used a lot of like biographical elements from his own childhood. The Freddy Krueger, the name comes from Fred Krueger, who was a bully when he was a kid.
Yeah.
He even named
that guy like saw that and knew. I wonder if that guy knew that he was like named, like, you know what I mean? He was the inspiration for like the, you know, worst child molesting serial killer, you know?
He even named a character in The Last House on the Left Krug because of it. So he was like, I'm going to use his name Krug. And he's like, no, I'm going to take it further in case he didn't notice what I was talking about him when I'm talking about rapists.
Yeah.
And then also a lot of the basis for the nightmare films had to do with the Asian death syndrome, which there was a series of articles printed in the LA Times in the 70s about Hmong refugees fleeing to the US from Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, fleeing from genocide and suffering like disturbing nightmares. And some of these men were dying in their sleep. And he's like, oh, well, that's an interesting element to pull into this. And
I love
he had a lot of source material.
I love that too. I love how creative inspiration can come from anywhere. Like you're reading a newspaper article about, a refugee who, died in his sleep and was scared to sleep because, of these nightmares that he was happening. And from that, he writes a character, and then that becomes like one of the greatest franchises in in horror movie cinema. It's just how just reading like one thing in your life can inspire, and spark such a vast, like now what becomes basically what he is always going to be associated with for the rest of his life. Like regardless of how good his other movies are, like his tombstone, I don't know what it says, but it probably says like, Freddy's dad or the creator of Freddy Krueger or a Nightmare on Elm Street director or something to that thing, like you just get associated with certain things in your life, good or bad. You come to grips with that. Like he's always going to be, the creator of a Nightmare on Elm Street. But I love how it comes out of, just a small newspaper clipping or TV, a newscast that he sees. I think what's kind of neat about him too is he just seems like a nice, normal guy. Like he doesn't have a lazy eye. He's not weird looking. He's, you know what I mean? Like,
look at that guy. Look at that face.
You know what I mean? I think like to have such a catalog of horror movies like he does. And then, I mean, he's got like Serpent in the Rainbow and, The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes are pretty ridiculous. The Scream franchise, but he's like
Scream is huge.
Some
people may say Scream is bigger than Nightmare, like for us, because of our age, A Nightmare on Elm Street's definitely where it's at. But people that are younger than us, I think Scream is probably the biggest thing that would stand out to them in a totally different style.
Yeah. I like though that he's kind of self-deprecating and aware of his impact on the genre, and then starts to sort of like talk about that and make fun of it. And then like, it's like art for art's sake. And he's like, it's a movie within a movie. So A New Nightmare is definitely reflective of that. Although I think A New Nightmare actually falls pretty flat. I'm not a fan of that movie. What I am a fan of is him embracing himself as a character and bringing, Heather back as herself to talk about how these films sort of take on a life of their own. And then, without A New Nightmare is basically like the pre-writing for Scream. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Clearly he had this idea and this awareness of what he was becoming in this genre. Like when you're the master of horror, I guess you like, and people are calling you that and you're dubbed that, you start to believe that. So he's like, okay, well then what is it about? Why? Like why? Oh, because I created these cliches. I created these rules. I created these recurring themes that are now a part of what a horror movie is supposed to be. And the 80s did that, because of these franchises, because we were seeing it over and over and over and over again, that he's like, all right, well, I'm going to make fun of it. And that's what Scream is. And that's what A New Nightmare started to be. And I can really appreciate that because I think there's, as an artist, when you take yourself too seriously, if you don't inject sort of that self-deprecating, humble self-awareness, then you're like, ugh. And you're like, oh, he's one of those guys. You know what I mean? So that's what makes Wes just really, I think, really a master of his craft. So.
Yeah, like you said about the Scream thing. I mean, A New Nightmare was basically Scream 3 with the movie set and all that. And I have often been very critical of movies made in the early 2000s, late 90s. And so it's kind of like when he starts to satirize horror, he starts to kind of make fun of it and make a joke. And like he's joking about, it's like it's like when people satirize heavy metal. It's like, no, heavy metal is not jokes. Heavy metal is serious.
Right.
Like it's the same thing. I kind of feel that way about horror. Like it's like, no, this is real. It's real, real, real. And then he's breaking down this fourth wall. I do think though that the Scream franchise was a more successful way of doing that and injecting that subcontext about horror movies, making horror movies. The horror tropes that you see, the people who have sex are the ones that are going to die.
Well, yeah, but you know why though? Because he directed all of those movies, as opposed to A Nightmare. He didn't. He lost the franchise after the first one. He did the first and third one, and then did a New Nightmare where he starts to develop that whole, that mocking of himself. So the franchise, for better or for worse, he loses control of it. And it's totally Robert Englund then who just carries the torch in the name of Freddy and not Wes Craven. Wes Craven created it, but it's Robert Englund's now, it's his ball to carry. And, that's what he did. And look, it's the house. It's a New Line Cinema, the house that Freddy built. I mean, that movie
Absolutely.
put it on the map, put that company on the map, and sustained it until Time Warner bought him out, So based on the strength of these two guys, but, you need the franchise face. You need Freddy. You need Robert Englund to do that and carry that. So, but that's why, Scream might be a better parody of itself than the other Freddy movies, is because he had control of all those films. Absolutely.
And I mean, as you had mentioned, the other master of horror that we need to talk about when talking about this franchise is Robert Englund. Yeah. And, his earlier roles, he was usually typecast as a nerd or a redneck. And so when he came in for the audition, Wes didn't really know what he wanted yet. He was auditioning some bigger guys. He was auditioning some older guys. And the great thing and the beautiful thing about this, him playing this character, is that he can act. Previously, he had been known for the series V. I've not
too young
seen
for that.
I've not seen that. I'm aware of it, but and I know it came back a few years ago.
Yeah. I remember it a little bit. I remember again, the 80s were like, that was the best time, man, because they had miniseries on TV, and it was like you had to watch this. You couldn't stream it at your leisure. You didn't binge it. You sat on the couch. I think that one was like back-to-back nights, like you watched it every night. Whereas like other miniseries was like every Monday or, for 4 weeks or something. But V was a big deal, man. Like aliens were a big deal, like the threat of aliens, at the same time. So when that came out, I just remember a couple scenes. I remember watching it. I remember it being a family event. Like we'd get pizza and, we put it on the ottoman in front of the couch and we eat pizza and we watch V. I remember a couple scenes in particular. I remember the scene, the aliens ate mice. And I remember him picking up the mouse by the tail and then just swallowing it whole. And then I remember the scene where somebody grabbed one of them by the nose and pulled the skin off, and it revealed the reptilian V skin under that.
Sure.
And look, if that's what life is, like a few distinct memories that like shape you forever. You know what I mean? Clear as day, I remember that. So kudos to V. But I think that was like the only thing he did before he got cast as Freddy. I don't think he had a huge career before that, and then really after that, he was only Freddy. So
yeah, it was bit parts, and then I think he's almost too big to play other roles after that.
You talk about getting typecast.
Yeah, but I mean, the fortunate thing for us is that he embraced it. He didn't try to get away from it. He didn't try to escape from it, and he gave us 9 films. So, an interesting fun fact here is that Englund is only one of 3 actors to portray a horror character in 8 consecutive times.
Okay.
So the other 2 are
he's the only actor to play the same
horror character 8 consecutive times.
8 consecutive times.
Yep.
So it's got to be franchises, and there's got to be a lot of them. It's definitely not A Nightmare, and it's definitely not Jason, because Kane Hodder bounced around, didn't even come until like later on. Michael Myers had different actors. It's not Leatherface. It's what else? What else? It's got to be in the 80s too, because that's the only time you had franchises. What else came out in the 80s? Pinhead? Does Pinhead have 8 movies? No.
Doug Bradley as
Does
Pinhead.
he? There's 8.
Yep.
He played Doug Bradley played Pinhead 8 times.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a third?
Yep.
I give up. I don't know.
Robert Englund, Doug Bradley, and then Tobin Bell, who played Jigsaw in the Saw franchise.
Saws?
Yeah.
I guess we got to do podcasts on that in order for me to see all of those films. I'm a huge Hellraiser guy, and I have not seen 8 Hellraiser movies. You know?
So I will tell you that getting through the 9 Elm Streets is a lot easier than getting through all the Hellraisers.
Yeah.
The point of diminishing return is much greater in the Hellraiser series. Yeah. I've made it through all of them. Actually, I think I have not seen the most recent, but there's a lot of freaking films for Hellraiser.
I didn't realize
really
that.
Bad.
Yeah.
The guy that plays Mayhem is in one of them for the insurance commercials.
Really?
He's one of the main characters. Yeah.
I think I read something about HBO is going to pick up a series and do a Pinhead series.
I think I heard that as well. Working with Clive Barker too.
That would be tight, man. Hellraiser is phenomenal. I think Pinhead is an iconic character. I would have loved to have seen the ending of Jason versus Freddy, them ending up in hell, and Pinhead being like, "What's the problem, boys?" You know what I mean? Because Pinhead has like a satire to him. He's sarcastic. You know, he could have done that. Yeah. That would have worked. So anyway, back to Robert Englund. Yeah, he embraced his character. And I don't think Freddy would be Freddy without Robert Englund. I know that there are some other people, like he was not the first choice. There was another guy that was cast but had some timing challenges or whatnot. But I'm glad that he was, because to me, he really embodies that personality, you know? And Freddy's not Freddy without Robert Englund, and the remake proves that, I think.
Here's a photo of myself and Crystal with Uncle Robert. We got to meet him at Comic-Con, and what a nice, warm person. Like right away, he's like, "Okay, I'm going to put my arm around her neck and with the claw, and here you put your hand on my throat." And I can even still remember like the feeling of his like neck whiskers, which is kind of weird, but like, it's just weird. You just meet this guy. And obviously this is pre-pandemic times when people were so open to be close to strangers. But
when was this?
Again, just embracing his character and embracing the fans, like, which is what you would hope for, you know, with these kind of stars.
What year was that?
That was last year.
Oh, really?
So yeah, 2019. That made our Christmas card.
I think it's great when actors aren't too big to sort of give back to the fans, recognize like what this character in this role has probably done for him, in his life financially, but just like what a lot of people, like what fanboys like you and I, appreciate about it. And for those guys to make themselves accessible, albeit they're making some money off of it. So I get it. It's not like they're giving their souls away. So, but still being able to go out and, because not everybody's a cool fan, some people are assholes. So to be able to go out and be able to kind of interact with them and allow themselves to do that, I think that's great. And I think I don't know how many, it happens like in the metal genre, it happens in horror movies. Like I don't hear about that happening in too many other genres of music or, other like, does Julia Roberts go out there and have like, Steel Magnolia Con, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Probably not, so I think it's a really unique genre to be a part of, where the sort of the fan insanity is so great, you know, and I think it's super appreciative when they go out and make themselves accessible like that.
Yeah, I think we've been trying. Like Rhode Island has a great Comic Con.
Mhm.
We've done C2E2 in Chicago. I've been to San Diego Comic Con, and meeting these people, it's mind blowing. You geek out, but I would remind everyone these are just people. They're just humans,
Right.
and like honestly, like it's like when you meet your musical heroes, the last thing they want to hear is like, "Oh, that riff is so sick." No, they want to, from being in a band myself,
Right.
you realize like what you actually want to talk about is, oh, we're going to be in Cincinnati tomorrow. Oh, is there a place that has good pizza? Like is there any cool art museums in Cincinnati? Like
Yeah.
that's what they actually want to talk about.
Right.
They don't want to talk about their music.
Right.
So it's kind of a balance. Like they understand, like Robert Englund understands the impact he has had on fans. So he's there and he's accessible. And then as fans, we need to, I kind of always let them drive the conversation. So, whoever it may be, I talked to Richard Brake, who was the Ice King in Game of Thrones.
Oh, really?
But he also was the Midnight Wolfman in 3 from Hell.
Okay.
He's been in a bunch of Rob Zombie movies. He was in 31. Great actor. But like, you're waiting in line, you get up to talk to him, and he just had all the time in the world for us. He's telling us stories and he's like, oh, you want this? And I'll sign this and I'll do this. And like, there's other people waiting in line, but it's really cool when people just are there to talk about whatever and like telling little anecdotes like, well, we were in England shooting this one thing. And let me tell you this one little story about when I was on Game of Thrones. And it's like, I didn't even ask anything about Game of Thrones, but he's just offering up this information.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's all about the scenario, though, the situation. Like, do you have an opportunity where you can actually converse with them about normal stuff? If you've paid to get a signature and a photograph or an autograph and a picture, rather, you're probably not going to have a chance to have like a normal conversation with them and let them lead that and talk about the things that they want to. So if you have a second, sometimes you have to take the fanboy route and be like, hey, man, maybe not like talk about a specific riff, but be like when I saw Derek Griggs, the Iron Maiden artist, I said, look, I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times, but I'm gonna tell you again anyways.
Yeah.
You greatly influenced my art and and forever changed the landscape of heavy metal album art. And I want you to know that you're appreciated. Boom, out.
Yes.
But when I got backstage at a Tool show and got to hang out with Danny Carey, I'm like, yeah, dude, let's talk about basketball. Just like you said, let's talk about ancient aliens, weird shit, not the dude, you know what I mean? It's all about situation. It's not very often you have a chance to be able to just kind of rap with your heroes,
Yeah, another one that I would say, because there's also been disappointments, which I won't touch on those, where you meet somebody and you're like, oh, they're just getting a paycheck to be here. But Robert Patrick was another good one, from Terminator and everything else. Sopranos, he's been in so many things. And like, he's like, let me tell you about my Harley dealership. Let me tell you about this. Like,
is the San Diego Comic-Con, is that the Mecca of all the shows?
Yeah, that's the Mecca. I've met the most people actually at Rhode Island Comic-Con. But San Diego is like the international hub of every major announcement for movies, comics, any kind of multimedia is going to be made at San Diego. I've had some opportunity to go there and check some things out. And it's just incredible. And
is it comic centric or is there
no?
Is there?
I think it started
horror representation there too, because Monster Palooza is like everything. It's a lot of horror, but then there's comic books, there's animation, there's everything. What was comic book like? Or is Comic-Con slanted in one direction?
No, I think that there's a very big horror representation there as well. But I think that it's like, I think you can think of anything that's nerdy is going to be represented at Comic-Con. I think this was the 51st year. Wow. So they've been doing it forever. But what I will say is that the media world has like descended upon it. So movies is very important. TV is very important. If you want your, like The Boys, when I was there, that was when they were kicking off The Boys. And I see all this signage for this show called The Boys. And I'm like, Amazon. Cause like at that time, Amazon hadn't really taken off yet with original content. So I see The Boys and I'm like, whatever. But like, that was their coming out party, was to be at that show. So there's definitely like pure comic content there. But there's also things that are cross genre. Todd McFarlane's there doing autographs and meet and greets, and at his booth at a certain amount of time. It's kind of the kind of thing too, where you also see people you want to meet just walking around. Charlie Benante, I run into him walking the aisle. I run into some UFC fighters walking the aisles. Like, they're just fans. Like, that's the place to be if you are a big fan. And you're almost incognito. Like, nobody's recognizing Charlie Benante. Like, he's just doing his thing. He's there. And that's too, when you don't want to be a Punisher. You don't want to be like, hey man, how's it going? How's Anthrax? Like, you just like, hey man, can I get a quick photo? I'm a huge fan and I appreciate what you do. Like, but that's definitely the Mecca. And there's definitely a lot of horror. But what I will say is, like, something like Monsterpalooza, they're taking that same idea, but they're focusing it on this. The same way as there's gaming cons and there's anime cons and there's things that are specific to.
I have been to some small comic shows. I have not been to Comic-Con. I do want to go and see that at some point. Monsterpalooza, I just did it for the first time 2 years ago. And I cannot wait to go back to that. That is an impressive show.
So let's talk a little bit of the themes of the Nightmare franchise. Obviously there's teenage drug use, sexuality, rock and roll, all these kind of things kind of are in the mix when it comes to these movies.
Yeah, you know, the 80s, there's some common like 80s horror movie themes that were in a bunch of the franchises. Like, if you have sex as a teenager, you are going to die. You know what I mean? That just seems to be the case. Like, Jason loved to kill, you know, young teenagers having sex. And I think that's a part of the lore of, like, Jason drowned because his counselors were having sex instead of saving him. And, you know, that's part of like his legend of his story. Freddy, the sexuality themes that are through his movies, though, you know, we touched upon them a little bit earlier, are a little bit more about, like, I think, sort of questioning yourself. Specifically, like the second movie we talked about, there's sort of that homoerotic subtext. But, you know, Freddy's always like, there's always this tension, particularly between him and Nancy. You know, he's like his tongue comes out of the phone, you know, and like French kisses her, and he's like, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. You know what I mean? He's always flicking his tongue at everybody. He calls every girl, every woman in every movie bitch like 1,000 times, you know. So he has that, and that's a very deliberate play. Like, he uses that sort of sexual tension as, you know, a fear tactic. And no other character really does that in any other movie like them. Probably because most characters don't talk. Most like horror movie characters don't talk. And his personality and his witty, you know, rapport allows him to do that. But Craven did a really good job of sort of writing that into his dialogue and writing it into the plot of the movies. And I think that's a really unique thing from a Nightmare.
Yeah, I think that the metaphors, like, we could do a whole podcast just on breaking down every film and the metaphors of what everything means. Like, I think watching it as a younger person, you probably don't notice the metaphors as much as going back now and watching all 9 films and analyzing it. You pick up on a lot more of that subtext again.
He's especially too, like, you know, Tina gets killed after sex in the first one. Freddy has all these like silver double entendres in that movie. He's like, you know, I'm going to split you in half. Well, you could take that 2 ways. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm going to kill you slow. You know what I mean? Like, again, you can you can insert other words into there and it has a whole different meaning. All of that is very, very deliberate, you know?
Something else that's very present in these films is the idea that parents might be wrong and that parents might not be the best role models for their kids.
Totally.
So it's like, okay, I'm getting chased by this murderer in my dreams, and the parents are like, nah, it's not happening. And you need to do this. You need to go to school. You need to eat this. You need to get your sleep. You need to do all this stuff like parents do. But at the same time, you know, Kirsten's being sent to bed at the same time that the mom's downstairs getting drunk, entertaining some guy. And there's just, it's kind of this question authority, question yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Very,
well, the relationship between the kids and the parents is a very obvious topic in those movies. Like you said, the parents don't listen to the kids. I think sometimes they try with good intent, but they have the wrong answer. They do the wrong thing. But there's also there's a suppression. There's a suppression that happens, like suppress your dreams, suppress your fears. The parents in the first films who were guilty of killing Freddy were suppressing the fact that they killed Freddy and then telling their kids, no, you're crazy. There is no burnt guy in your dreams trying to kill you, even though they knew that there was. So the idea of suppression sort of shows up in many facets in those movies, between the relationships of the parents and the kids, and the friendships with each other. Like, friendship's a big part of that, you know, just sort of the suppressed nature between everybody. So it's a recurring theme throughout all of them.
A listener wrote in, has a movie ever given you a nightmare?
I don't know. I don't recall. I don't think so.
I feel like
that I can remember, not as a kid that I can remember.
My gut says no, but the one thing that I can remember in my dreams when I was a kid, before I knew what Star Wars was, I would have like a recurring dream where Yoda was like in it. But I didn't know like Yoda like as this funny little guy. I just remember seeing this creature in my dream.
Yeah.
Probably when I was like 3 or 4 years old. But so my answer is no. That's only you that has nightmares, not Ken or myself.
Yeah. Continuing on sort of that suppression conversation, though, like that also sort of extends into like a self-reflection and how you see yourself too. Like, these kids have these thoughts, they bury their thoughts. There's a lot of visuals throughout the movies of them in mirrors, and then they either see Freddy in return or they see themselves and they're breaking through the mirror, or the mirror sucking them in, or you know what I mean? So the sort of that reflection, an inner reflection, a reflection of themselves, them questioning themselves, their parents questioning them, and then, you know, the suppressed feelings of what they're experiencing all sort of ties in and is consistent throughout that whole franchise.
So one of the things that sets this franchise apart from other horror series is the creative, innovative ways that everyone is dying throughout this series. There may be only 1 or 2 in a film that stand out, but I think we should talk a little bit about some of our favorites.
I talked about I think all the best kills are in Dream Warriors Part 3. Certainly the effects of the deaths are the best in this movie, but my favorite is probably when Freddy kills Taryn and she was the heroin addict and he's like, want to get high, and then all of his fingers are the hypodermic needles, which is just so cool. I think that's the first time that we see the blades as something else, which I thought was really cool. But what really makes that scene too is like all the pock marks that she has on her forearms, and they just become like these weeping mouths, and like, meh, meh, you know what I mean? And they're opening and closing, and he's just like, rah. So what a great movie! What a great like kill scene ever! What a great movie scene of all time, regardless of what you're talking about. Like, I mean, just fantastic in so many ways. I love that.
Yeah,
it's probably my favorite.
Yeah, iconic imagery. I mean, that's the thing with a lot of these is that it stands out and it burns an image in your mind.
Well, what's interesting about that, there's a pretty lengthy documentary about this building of this franchise, and the actress who plays her said to this day, people come up to her and tell her that they stopped using because of that scene.
Oh, wow.
And that's pretty wild, man. Like,
Yeah.
have an impact on people's lives because of a horror movie death, you know, that's pretty impactful.
To this day, I have stopped listening to headphones and watching TV at the same time because of Glenn's death. This is probably
Glenn being Johnny Depp, right?
Yeah, Glenn being Johnny Depp, young Jonathan Depp. This is one of my favorite scenes by far, and it's just so simple, but being sucked into the bed and the geyser of blood coming up and flowing across the ceiling. Again, these practical effects. It defies gravity. It defies everything that we understand, and it's just a horrific sight. And one of the reasons why I picked this as my number one movie.
It doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like, I don't know what happened to him. He got sucked into the bed, and then what? He got like put in a giant blender really quick, and then turned into a blood smoothie and sprayed back up onto the ceiling. But it works because you don't have to really know what happened. You just have to appreciate the old faithful of blood all over the ceiling,
That's the psychological element, though, is like this idea that you could just be on your bed, you fall asleep for a second, and now you're a geyser of blood. Mm-hmm. Was that your old band name? Your old band was called Geyser of Blood.
I also enjoy, again, Dream Warriors, number one for this reason. Welcome to primetime, bitch. When what was her name?
Jennifer.
Yeah. When Jennifer, she, the whole movie, she's like, I'm going to be on TV one day. And she's the chick that stayed awake by smoking cigarettes and burning herself with the cigarettes, Yeah. So she's in the TV lounge and she's smoking and she's burning herself to stay awake. And then like Freddy, like, he comes out of the TV, like the way that they shot that, like where his face stretches out of the top of the TV before it really takes, and it's just sort of this like elastic
phenomenal
look before it really takes full form, and his robot arms or the insides of the TV come out and grab her and plunge her head into the TV, and then they leave her there, and then when they come in, they see her like her whole body's just stuck there. Like that's just a great scene. It's not like you're taking an inflatable doll and ripping it through the window of a door where it looks obviously fake. That looked really good to me. I thought this movie, hands down, is just above and beyond all the other movies in terms of FX, and this scene is a great example of it.
Yeah, and making the deaths correspond to the personality of the person or their addictions or whatever it may be. Tina's death, like you had said, her and her boyfriend have sex, falls asleep. Next thing you know, her boyfriend's looking up as she's getting dragged up the wall, across the ceiling, and sliced open by this invisible entity.
Yeah.
Just blood everywhere.
I love this scene too. I love that you, again, don't really know what's happening. She's just being smeared violently across the ceiling, which, that's why one of the things in the A New Nightmare, when he explains it, basically A New Nightmare relives the entire first movie. You see all the same deaths. He kills a girl in that movie the same way, but this time you see Freddy and he's like standing on a ceiling, dragging her around by her hair. So it kind of explains what happened here, but visually it's just not as impactful as the original film.
Correct.
This is a phenomenal scene in that first movie.
Yeah, I appreciate how they show how it was done in a way by having him walk across the ceiling, dragging her. But overall, that movie is like, aside from a few things, that's kind of a throwaway film. But yeah, what you don't see makes it scarier. And you put yourself in the shoes of her boyfriend, just sitting there watching your girlfriend dragged up and sliced up, and then blamed for it afterwards because there's no explanation for it.
Yeah. The Dream Master, when Debbie gets her arms broken when she's doing the bench press. First of all, I love the 80s montage of the workout. I love that these movies take you right back into what was hip at that time. Like,
Yes.
the really bad karate scenes are hilarious, although just so awkward and painful to watch. But like, you know, don't forget like the VHS workouts, Jane Fonda workouts. That was huge, big business back then. So,
Yeah.
you know, all that like aerobic stuff was very hip. And, you know, she was like, you know, that chick in like the workout gear. But this is a great scene and an otherwise somewhat forgettable movie, I think. But when she's doing the bench press and her arms break at the elbow, you're like, ooh, that's brutal. And you're like, what is happening? Just that scene alone, just the breaking, if they had ended it there,
Yes.
I was like, wow, this is incredible. Then they turn into like insect arms and she's flailing around, like turning, you know, in this mid metamorphosis, and you're like, what is happening? And eventually she turns into a cockroach. And then, you know, the scene just keeps going and going and going. And then she's like in the roach motel, and then she's, you know, and Freddy crushes it, and it like spurts out this unbelievably large amount of goo. It's preposterous. Great. You know, I love this franchise for that reason, that he can kill people in ways that Michael Myers will never get to do, that Jason will never get to go. These guys they have knives and they have hatchets and they have pretty creative tools in the tool shed to use, but they don't get to do this, you know?
Well, and again, tying it back to her thing is working out and she hates bugs. You see her squishing a bug earlier in the movie. The last death that I want to touch on is Philip's marionette death, where you know his tendons / veins are ripped out at the wrists.
I love this
and
scene. Yeah.
Him walking out of the room, and they kind of cut between him walking and not seeing the tendons, but him walking like he's sleepwalking.
Right.
And then the suicide. Well, it's not really a suicide, but it's forced. You know, he's murdered basically by Freddy, plummeting off of the top of the building, which appears to be a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, impactful. And again, like, this is the stuff that nightmares are made of.
Right. Yeah. You know, most of those, with the exception of Rebecca's death, were all from the same movie. So 1 and 3, you know, again, it's pretty easy to, you know, rank those two films above the rest. I just wish that the other directors in the other movies had taken like that part of the gimmick of the franchise and really expanded on it. There's some honorable mentions in the other movies too, you know, like in The Dream Child, where Alice's boyfriend Dan gets like, he's on the motorcycle and the motorcycle like kind of transforms into him. That's not a terrible scene. You know, it's a little cheesy, but you know, that's not bad.
I know that specific scene as well. There was actually a lot more brutal footage for that they had to cut out because it was deemed too obscene. So.
Oh, really?
The motorcycle scene.
Yeah. So. Yeah. But all those really are the first two movies. So, or 1 and 3, which, you know, are our top 2 rankings. So, you know, it's no surprise that our ranking is what it is and all those deaths are in them.
The franchise that did a good job of really being creative with deaths again would be Saw, you know, thinking about different ways to kill people.
Well, I think Saw gives a direct homage to A Nightmare on Elm Street, in the fact that in Dream Warrior, you see the tricycle come out and then sort of melts in the house, which is a real cool visual. And then the tricycle is a big part of the whole, you know, Jigsaw look. So I don't think that's coincidence that's related.
Yeah. So the success of this franchise extends beyond just the films. You know, from 1988 to 1990. They run 2 seasons of a show called Freddy's Nightmares, 44 episodes in total, it's a pretty big number of episodes. Each episode was introduced by Freddy Krueger and featured 2 different stories. It was low budget. And I can appreciate, just like when they did the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, they're just trying to expand this franchise and get it to more people and expand the history. And I'm always for that. It's just, this wasn't The Mandalorian.
Right.
This isn't some cinematic quality series.
Well, I don't remember seeing this when it was live on television as a kid. I have, you can find anything now. So I've seen a couple of these. I certainly haven't watched all 44 of them. I think it started out with good intentions. First episode, Toby Hooper directed it. I mean, that's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Poltergeist guy. And they show the trial of Freddy. They show when the parents track him down and they kill him, or in this TV series, like a single cop actually is one who kills him, and he's guilt-ridden about it, and that has like a terrible death scene of him at the dentist at the end of it. So I think it started out with some promise, but the rest of the shows really doesn't have like Freddy as a character in it. He kind of like MCs the show and then piece him out, and then it's just sort of like a weird sort of like Tales from the Crypt. Fun fact about that: when this show got canceled, I think all the whole team that was producing the show and the FX guys went on and just moved over to Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, I believe you're correct. My background with this show, I didn't see it in the first run, but when I had bought my first house, I had the TV channel Chiller, which was a cable network that was just dedicated to horror. Around that time, though, as well, is when Fox starts having their movie channel. Everybody starts having their own movie channel, so there's not a lot of content to go around. One of the things that Chiller did run on a regular basis all the time was Freddy's Nightmares. So throw it on in the background, it would run for a few hours. So I wouldn't religiously like sit down and be like, oh, I'm going to watch a bunch of episodes of the show, but it definitely was on. It's one of those cool things that, cool character, you see Freddy on your TV. And one of the things to note is the guest appearances. A lot of actors that grew up to be somebody, like this little guy named Brad Pitt, Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order, and Bill Moseley, who was also in Texas Chainsaw. I don't know if he was in the episode that Toby Hooper directed.
If he did, I didn't recognize him. I don't think so.
But it's always cool to see little shows like this anthology series where actors appear because they're on it for one or two episodes, and then they go on to have these big film careers later on. It's always fun to look back on them in their younger days.
I think what this TV show is just more of, it's a pretty good example of, distributor or publication just kind of like milking the stone for all of its blood. You know what I mean? I mean, they've taken this franchise and knew it was a moneymaker, so they'll continue to do that. Let's make a TV show. Sure. Let's throw a low budget at it and see how much money we can make off the show. Sure. That ties into the obscene amount of collectibles that are available for Freddy, and always have been, So, I mean, they realized they had a gold mine after the first movie, and then that developed this franchise. But Jesus, did they exploit that? I mean, yes. Pretty big.
Well, and I think that nowadays, when you hear they're going to make a TV series, it's a lot different. You're like, oh, they're going to make a TV series. What huge stars are going to be in it? Oh, HBO's doing it. Wow, it's going to be awesome. Like when you have these big backers. But back then, it was like the quality of a show like Xena Warrior Princess, like just these low budget straight to syndication series where it was cheesy and whatever, but like you said, a money grab.
That was a good show.
But I'm getting into the collectibles. Yeah. They threw Freddy on everything, man. Like, and it's funny that you've got this child murderer molester with a talking doll that every kid wants, and the yo-yo that I've got sitting on my shelf there with Freddy's face on it. Like kids want this stuff. They may not have even seen the movies, but the character is so memorable
because of the rating on the movie itself. But yet they can market all this stuff specifically for kids. So there is a little bit of an ironic thing happening here. Kind
of surprised there wasn't like a watered down animated series. The Freddy's Nightmare Show or whatever. Where he's essentially a good guy or something. They would somehow twist that. And then even thinking about like costumes, like to this day, you can get a Nightmare on Elm Street costume. There's 10 different versions at your Halloween
Well,
Express.
again, I think that speaks to the value of just the 80s franchises and what they were able to do, because the Monster Mash, the sort of the iconic monsters or classics, the 80s horror franchises became them. I always wanted to be Freddy, always. But, with my OCD, ADD brain, I'm like, I can't do Freddy unless I do it justice. So one, I couldn't do it in a year where I had a beard because I didn't want to shave. You know what I mean? So I had to be clean shaven. A couple of years ago I was, and I'm like, oh, now I can finally be Freddy. But then I was like, how am I going to do this makeup? How am I going to do this face? And I was like, I cannot put the effort in to give him justice. And I don't like wearing masks because you go out and you have a couple of drinks, you're at a party, you can't socialize. And then it just, I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to give up the idea of being Freddy, even though I wanted to be Freddy. And then I don't know how it came to me, but I was just like Freddy Krueger, Freddie Mercury Krueger. I did this mashup. I just kind of had a haircut like him. I found a fake mustache and some buck teeth and got the rest of the Freddy stuff. And Freddie Mercury Krueger was born. It was like one of my best costumes, I think, ever.
Amazing. I was full blown Freddy. It's kind of hard to see in this photo. I'm in the background by a big metal statue lion, which is dressed like a ghost. In the foreground is a kid carrying his own head. And our good friend Nate Fairlauer is
okay. I'm like, I was trying to, man, my eyes are going.
Yeah, I'm to the left of the statue, and then Nate's to the right of the statue, dressed as I don't know what, something very scary, in some sort of robe and plaid pants. I see there. But Nate and I worked at a design studio in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin, and every year they would do business after, like the downtown district. All the businesses would do business after 5 trick-or-treating for the kids. So they'd have the community trick-or-treating. But on top of that, some of the parents, especially with younger kids, it's easier to just go to all these businesses on Main Street, walk down the sidewalk. But thinking about your Halloween decor, I would really go all in on decorating the outside of our building with spider webs and boarding up the windows. At that time, I was in a band. I had a nice PA system, so we put the PA in the windows and fill the whole street with, the theme to Halloween and horror music and creepy sounds and, give out candy. And of course, the first year we do this, I'm dressed as Freddy Krueger. I'm not moving so that I'm like, people think I'm part of the decor. And I jump out. Our administrative assistant at the time is like, you got to be careful. Kids are going to run into the street. I'm like, kids aren't going to run into the street. Of course, the first kid I scare runs directly into the street, which is like Main Street traffic.
Did you get hit by a car?
Nah, I did not get run over by a car. But
tell me though, when you put the Freddy gloves on, didn't it like change your personality? Isn't it like kind of like a dream come true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the fun part about role playing for Halloween, is being able to sort of, reinvent yourself as a character. And when you're an iconic character like Freddy, those putting just even a shitty plastic glove on, you know what I mean, with the plastic knives, it takes over your personality. Like you become that. There was, again, in this documentary that I was watching about the making of these movies, they interviewed the woman who played the nurse in A New Nightmare. And there was one scene where like Freddy possesses her, and she just has the gloves and sort of like threatens the kid. And she said when she put that glove on as an actress, the personality sort of embodies you. And then that's really what that movie is about. Like these characters, these really coming to life in like the real world. It's kind of this really fascinating psychological thing that happens to you when you're in these costumes. Like it does change you. It does give you this sort of escape. It does give you this alternate reality. That's why I love Halloween. Ultimately, you get a chance to let your freak flag fly, just be weird, do something out of the normal. You know what I mean? And Freddy is just a really cool one. So iconic. Everybody know when you're Freddy, you get to be like perverted and murderous, and you know, you get to get
What I enjoyed was that I scared more parents than children.
yeah,
Like the kids would get freaked out, you jump at them, you whatever. The parents are the ones that would like be like, we need to go now. We need to get out of here. And it's like it just and again, I think it's because of the impact that these movies have on when they come out and you're a kid. You remember it your whole life. It haunts you. I think it maybe too, it's a little different for people like us who are like obsessed with horror. You become a little desensitized. You're like more like, oh, this is cool. Can I get a photo? But when you're like the every person, those kind of moments stick with you and haunt you forever. Because for me, it's like Halloween year round.
Right.
I mean, I call my house Spooky Time Station. So like we are, live in the horror, live in the haunted house. Like,
that's what I like. I like to show people who don't get it, like what they're missing out on,
Well, and it's almost more impactful to those people because it is scarier. Right. It has stuck with them. They're like, I can't watch those movies. Those are too scary. I have kids now. I can't watch that kind of violence. Yeah. So it's fun. Going back to the collectibles, there was a Nightmare on Elm Street video game for the original Nintendo, the 8-bit version. Pretty cool. You'd go around, you'd collect all of Freddy's bones and you take them to the high school furnace. And once you get them all there, then Freddy would assemble and he'd be the big boss at the end. You'd have to fight zombies and all sorts of things. But I think the coolest thing about this game, which I have not actually played, is that there's a sleep meter. And you had to make sure that your sleep meter didn't go too low or you'd fall asleep and die. So you'd have to go around in the game and collect coffee cups so that you would stay awake.
At least it's not like a rehash of E.T. on the Atari 2600. It sounds like it's a little bit better done. That video game was terrible. So basing video games on movies can like be good or bad depending on how it's executed,
Yeah, I think some games are better than others. And I've seen like for this and the Friday the 13th games for Nintendo, they've done action figures that are like the neon colors, like just fun to play off of that kind of theme.
Did Freddy ever end up a character on Mortal Kombat?
Yes, I believe so. In one of the more recent renditions.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's just
Mortal Kombat from that reason, like that kind of crossover. That goes into like, the whole like, Avengers thing and the AVP. Like I do think it's cool when you can mash up all your cool favorites from different movies and genres and everything. But it's got to be done right, man. Mortal Kombat, that's cool because then it's like you can make them fight each other. You can't mess that up. You give them some cool moves.
Yeah, I have the latest Mortal Kombat, and one of the expansion characters is Spawn, and I'm a huge Spawn fan, huge McFarlane fan. So I was actually playing as Spawn a lot of the game because it makes sense. Like you want to see those special attributes, like he's got the chains and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The fatalities are very Spawn centric. So just fun to see the worlds collide.
The mashups, that colliding in the worlds is really, it's just a throwback to being a kid where like you have your G.I. Joe toys, you have your Star Wars toys. Of course, they're going to fight each other. So what are you doing? That's like the original mashup. You know what I mean? You taking all of your toys and like He-Man versus, whatever, you know what I mean? You got your Hot Wheels in there, everything. It's all mashed up together. I think that's really sort of the very first subconscious desire to have these mashups and these crossovers planted. And that's why you're psyched. You want to see Freddy versus Jason. That's why you want to see Alien versus Predator. That's why you want to see all this shit cross over. And that's why the Marvel movies are so good,
Yeah, and it's the time, the age old who would win. Would the Hulk win or would Wolverine win? Like a lot of that was given to us in comic book form, but now we're hitting a time in our history where you can see it on the big screen and it's not cheesy. Unfortunately, I think for both Alien versus Predator and Freddy versus Jason, they were just a little too early.
Yeah. Or I don't. I mean, they had been talking about him for so long. Maybe it was a little too
Yeah.
late. Maybe they just, they rewrote it so many times that they fudged it. What if you did like a big celebrity death match between all of them? Jason, Freddy, Alien, Predator. Who's gonna win that if they're all like in a battle royal?
I would love to see the Predator versus Jason. I think that would be a very good physical matchup.
Predator versus Jason. Yeah, big guys, both big guys.
And I think that on the flip side, I think the Xenomorph versus Freddy because of Freddy's ability to manipulate the things around him.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, Freddy always wins based on the fact that the guy. I don't know why you can't kill Jason. Honestly, has nobody tried to literally just dismember him and chop his head into tiny little pieces and scatter him all over the place? Because he's only just a physical manifestation. Xenomorphs are living things. Predators are living things. Killable, killable by subservient humans. So Freddy, who can transcend space and time and sleep and reality, he wins every time in the celebrity death match until you say to him, Freddy, I don't believe in you. I'm not afraid of you. Well, unless you know that, you know what I mean? He's going to F you up. So
when it comes to talking collectibles, I think that NECA is always one of the top brands to talk about just because they take all of our favorite things and they make them come to life in little 7-inch sizes. So they've got figures for pretty much every Freddy movie. And then they have an accessory pack, which has the primetime TV setup and the big worm snake, which is even cooler because like you were saying as a kid, you have your G.I. Joes, you have your Star Wars, but then you want those kind of like ancillary pieces that you see in a movie, but you don't actually get the manifestation in an accessory.
Yeah.
They just did a whole accessory pack for the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. It's like pizzas and signs and all these like pieces that help set up your scene in your collection that don't necessarily come with the figure. I think just seeing those things play out in the plastic realm, whether it's the heroin Freddy there.
Is NECA the best of the best in your opinion?
I think they're the best of the best on a budget. Like Hot Toys is probably the best of the best, but you're talking $500, $600.
What size? Like 12-inch miniature?
Yeah,
12-inch
about 12-inch. Yeah, probably 12-inch scale, quarter scale.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's the best of the best. But when you're talking about having a vast collection, these figures range anywhere from $20 to $40. So I think this is probably it's the point where people will still pay for it and you get the most quality. This is the NECA figures are where you get the multiple hands, the multiple weapons, the multiple heads and faces. And it really allows for you to set your own scenario. And if you don't set the scenario, the packaging is great now. They're doing this excellent packaging with window boxes with all these panels, and then you get to see all those weapons and faces and hands. So if you decide to not take your figure out of the package, it's a great way to display it. So maybe
75% of the time? 90%?
What's that?
What's the percentage that you don't take it out of the package?
I think that that's a good question. I think I take the majority out of the package.
You do?
Because there's not enough shelf space for the packages. So for me, it has to be a really good visual reason to keep it in the package. Mm-hmm. I just got a new like Gremlins figure, and I think that when I put it with all the figures out of the box, it'll be a great back piece to put behind them. Mm-hmm. But I'm out of space. This room's full. I'm out of space. So.
That's like I couldn't collect toys or vinyl or start any new collections. Like I've already maxed out. I'm not buying a new house anytime soon. Maybe if I got like a second home somewhere, I could start another collection. But the NECA stuff seems to me like it's the coolest because they have the most horror content too.
Yes. Yeah, they have the most license, I would say, like out of all brands.
Okay.
Super 7 does a great job, but they're doing like the reaction figures. So they're doing the 3 3/4. So those are less detailed. They are doing now what they're calling the Ultimates lines, which are, they have the fancier packaging and the more expansive. So I just got these Ren and Stimpy figures. Phenomenal. I can't take them out of the package because there's so many accessories in the window scene. Beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Do you think that when our kids are our age, in their late 30s, mid 40s, that they're going to be collecting like vintage Paw Patrol action figures? And you know what I mean? Like, it seems to me like these collectibles, like these adult toy collectibles, are very specific to cartoons, animation, pop culture of the 80s.
I would say that
I may be wrong. I'm not an expert
Paw
on
Patrol is more like Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street.
Okay, well, whatever the equivalent to G.I. Joe was for us.
So
now,
what we're seeing right now, I can tell you right now in the toy industry, Hasbro just acquired the license for Power Rangers. So Power Rangers
of an old show.
Power Rangers is after my time, you know, like I maybe caught the first season, but like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is probably like my cutoff for what was popular for my age group. Power Rangers now is coming in hard. You're going to see Power Rangers everything. But so yes, those kind of things, you just have to think about what are the cartoons or the movies that came out. I don't know. Like right now, they're just reselling us our childhoods.
Right.
That's it. Like I am buying all the G.I. Joes that came out in 1987. Like,
proof that 80s greatest decade, dude.
Right now, who knows where it's going to go? I mean, who knows like what I'm personally going to be buying in the next 20 years? Right. I don't know. And what value any of this holds, you know, I don't buy to invest. I buy because I love to be surrounded by the things that make me feel great. So it's fun. Speaking of like higher end, Iron Studios is another one that does like really cool statues and figures.
Yeah.
Again, the higher multi-$100 price point. And then Mego, which is a throwback to the 70s. They're still around. They're making a push to come back. When Crystal and I went, we saw at the same time at Rhode Island Comic-Con that Robert Englund was here. He did a showing of the original Nightmare at the theater right by our house. So he did a Q&A before the film and then showed the film. Another cool experience. And that's then really everybody cool, that got the like VIP experience got a free limited edition Mego of Freddy, which is cool. It's got a little fabric sweater. Music, huge part of this franchise. So obviously the score is one thing, but then there's like these weird offshoots, like the Freddy's Greatest Hits, where they're covers and originals with Robert Englund doing all the vocals. Mm-hmm. I personally own this record. It's not the first thing I put on, but look at that cover, man. Like,
I think that's just something that you hang in a frame on the wall, you know?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff. Again, talking about 12-inch pieces of art, like the albums. I'm always looking for the weird pop culture stuff, the most bizarre. I've got so much vinyl that's just the weirdest pop culture. I have a Kentucky Fried Chicken Colonel's Christmas album. I've never listened to it. But,
did you know about that when you purchased it, or was that just a purchase based off of the name?
It was based off of when I saw it at the record store. I'm like, I need to leave with this. Like, I'm always treasure hunting for the next great thing I don't need. No, I need.
That just shows you the depth of your insanity. That's for sure.
I try to grab all of the coolest things that I find at the time. If they're the coolest thing in my collection at the time of buying it, at the end of the day, my whole collection has got a bunch of cool stuff.
And by cool, you mean weird. Doesn't make sense. Could be.
So another big, like, this is actually pretty big hit song was A Nightmare on My Street with DJ Jazzy Jeff.
Dude, I love that song. That's like, I think
And
that's
the
a
Fresh
classic.
Prince.
I think that's a classic song. Yeah.
I know that they ripped the score without permission, so they had to settle out of court for using it in their song.
What,
But
like the synthesizer, like the?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
yeah. So they did it without permission. The movie studio sued them, and then they settled out of court. But again,
Well,
just a
didn't the
great
movie
piece of
studio hire them to write that song for the movie?
what's that?
I said, didn't the movie studio hire them to write that song for the movie?
No, and actually they had to put like some warning that said this song was not authorized.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, it was like this was made without authorization by this movie and has no connection to it or something. Uh, but great song,
That's
and
right.
the biggest song that comes out of all of this franchise would be Dream Warriors by Dokken. Like
Right.
that's the jam. They're still playing the video on MTV Classic nightly. And I love the tie into the movie with the little house and Freddy's actually in there with George Lynch and company.
I wish I could be a fan of Dokken with you on this one. It's just one of those things. It's one of those bands that escaped me from the 80s. And I was every other band in that genre I was into, because I put the Dokken sound in with like the Quiet Riots and the Rats and the Twisted Sisters, more so than like the Poisons and the Whitesnakes. Like Dokken was heavier,
Yeah.
And dude, Lynch Mob, I know George Lynch's guitar work, dude, shreds, I just never really got into it for whatever reason. Just one of those.
Yeah, they're definitely like more of a classic metal band versus like a glam band.
Sure.
They're not Poison. They're not a party band.
Right. They're not a party band, right?
Again, heavy metal is meant to be taken seriously. So, but another great piece in my collection, when I was able to get that 12-inch single, what's cool about this is the single comes out, they release the single, it's on the soundtrack, it's on MTV, then they put it on their fourth album because it's such a big hit, written specifically for the movie. And I think my favorite thing about an interview with Don Dokken talking about this was he sang too high. Like this is the highest he is sang on any song.
It's hard for him to sing, yeah.
And now you're screwed because you have to reproduce that night after night after night because you can't play a set without Dream Warriors.
Years, yeah. You have to achieve the Holy Grail. You have to get the Dokken album autographed by everyone in Dokken and Robert Englund.
There you go. Yeah. Death Waltz, which is in conjunction with Mondo Tees, Mondo Prints. They do all the cool alternative movie posters. They've been doing these killer reissues of classic soundtracks, a lot of horror. So if you're a fan, these are truly art pieces at this point where the art is redone, reimagined. A lot of work is put into these. So it's not just about what is the music, but putting this in your collection is something to hold on. I have a beautiful Twin Peaks soundtrack that they did with unique die cuts.
Yeah, I like those reissues where they put a little art flair on it. I think those are badass.
I think the soundtrack in general, though, is very iconic and sign of the times. Like a lot of that synth work, John Carpenter comes to mind too from that era. If you want to do a cool horror movie now that has a throwback feel, you've got to have that synthwave vibe to your soundtrack. Stranger Things, they do a great
80s
job.
If you mean, yeah, for sure.
So, Ken, what is the future of the franchise?
There is none. There never should have been. I am going to go on the record here and say that 75% of the time, maybe this number needs to be higher. You should not remake a horror movie and rehash it and try to redo the original plot. I don't think you should do that ever. This was an absolute failure. The visual aesthetic.
You're talking about 2010, right?
Yes, the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street remake is an absolute travesty. The visual aesthetic of Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger is vastly important to that franchise. Why would you try to recreate something like that? I get Rob Zombie's Halloween, even if I don't particularly care for it. And it's very painful for me to say that because I love Rob Zombie. I love his other movies. I just didn't appreciate his remakes. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, love the original. Think it's a perfect horror movie. Don't remake it. But a little bit more forgiving because you can take a dude, put him in a mask, and forgive the fact that you don't know who the actor is underneath it. Robert Englund is Freddy. Freddy is Robert Englund. You don't ever touch that. And that's like saying, would you try to make another Silence of the Lambs without Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter? You can try to make him a younger Hannibal Lecter. I get it. You get a new actor. He's a new Han Solo as a young guy. I get it. But you don't take the same actor. You don't take a new actor and try to have him play the exact same role, the same age, the same movie. He had no ears. What the fuck happened to his ears? Dumb, totally dumb. Failure.
All right. So since this is like a presidential debate, would you please mute your mic at this point?
Touche.
All right. So I agree with you 100%. 2010's A Nightmare was a failure.
Okay.
Failed attempt. They tried to make it their own, and I think that's where they went wrong. I contrary to you, I believe that the Rob Zombie reboot of Halloween was successful. I enjoyed that. I'm talking specifically about the first movie at this time. I think that he had a lot of guidance from the studio to make sure that he didn't break out of what the structure was of the original. I thought it was like an HD redo, like whereas it was a little modernized, but it still had a very vintage vibe where it was like kind of ambiguous to what the era was. I thought the music was great. I thought the tone was great. I thought that if he could have continued on a trajectory and made like 4 movies that were like the first one, I think he would have been successful. The second one, he went way more Rob Zombie route and he went way more psychedelic. And I think because that one fell on its face in the eyes of like the critics, I think that's why the series ended there. I also think though the second one was less successful because the first one, he had very strict guidelines. The second one, he didn't have very strict guidelines.
Yeah, but don't you think that you can do that because it's a character that anybody can play, a silent character in a mask? So there has to be rules about what you can rehash.
So in response to that though, and this was, I thought about this a lot prior to this conversation. What I would say is, yes, Robert Englund is Freddy. So the only way that you would successfully pick up the franchise here is you have to find an actor who can imitate Robert Englund to a T.
Okay.
Also has a similar bone structure, height, build. You're gonna put him in the same sweater. You're gonna do the makeup so that the makeup looks identical. If you really want to be different, if you look at all the action figures, they take the slight variations from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. They all have a slight variation already, but maybe the hat's black instead of brown. I don't know. Maybe you just do a subtle tweak to say like, this is the next era, but you have to have a pre-planned 4 to 5 story arc written before you start the first movie. What you don't do is what they did in 2010, and they just remake the first movie. And they take all the cool stuff out of it. Like they take all of the reality. Like, I don't know. It had no substance to it.
So are you saying you could take the likeness of him? If you can replicate Robert Englund, make a new story arc?
Yeah. So what you need to do is you need to put somebody like The Gentleman. You need to put somebody like Eli Roth, who is a true horror guy that understands it. He's going to be able to make those torturous creative murder scenes happen properly. Or you take somebody like the Duffer brothers, the ones who did Stranger Things. Okay. You take somebody who can like do this in a creative manner. I mean, maybe you even start with a cast of younger kids. They're 14, 15-year-old kids. and you can then allow them. They don't all die, right? Some of them are going to die. You got to have them die, but
Right.
maybe the arc carries throughout high school. Do you go back to the 80s? Do you just go back to like 1990 and pretend that everything after Dream Warriors never happened? And you pick it up in 1990 and you set it in that time. I think with some of these classics, when they go back in time, they're more successful than trying to do it like in 2020.
I don't know. I don't know, man. I feel like it was a great run. Honor it in film history. Leave it alone. You know what I mean? There is a time and place for everything, and sometimes you just got to move on. Let's find the next Freddy Krueger. We need a new horror movie. Let's not rehash the same thing again. You know what I mean? You know, at some point, you just have to say it's over. You know.
Crystal says, I agree with Ken on this one. It was not just me being cranky while watching the remake. It's just not good.
Yeah.
I will say when I watched all 9, it was a little bit of a refresh because those last ones are so bad. To have just like a more polished film, but obviously it was garbage. But what I will say to you though about the Let It Be is that's impossible, because if there's money to be made, Hollywood will find a way to make it. So it's happening. There's no way that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, who are they going to make the money with? Just a bunch of old heads like that who just go and complain that it's not the original. Like, we complain when our favorite bands pump out a new album. We're like, dude, we want to see the first album. I want to hear the first songs from the first album. Why would I want to see a rehash of a movie that I've seen 9 times already? I did a podcast on.
Here's why. You know how much money episode 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars made? Like, that's, you know who's going to go see that? Everybody
rehash, though, but that's not a rehash. They're different characters. Well, 1, 2, and 3 are different because it's the early iterations.
So you have 2 routes you can take. You can either do sequels or you can do a reboot.
Prequels?
I would suggest well, so there's a difference between remake and reboot. So the 2010, that's a remake. They're remaking an old film. Rob Zombie was a remake. It was a remake of the first film. A reboot is where you pick up, it's a sequel. You pick up elsewhere in the timeline and you reboot the series from there. So for example, John Carpenter did an excellent job with the last Halloween movie.
Totally.
That's a sequel and it's a reboot. So it's rebooting the series for a whole new set of fans. So it's old fans and new fans.
I agree. That was done well. Again, because, and you can put any guy in a mask and that character lives on. Freddy, you can't.
Hollywood.
It's a unique situation.
So the way that movies are successful is when real fans are in charge of a franchise.
Okay, so you and I should do Nightmare on Elm Street? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you would have to look at it as if they're going to redo it, you wouldn't say, no, don't do it. They're going to say, Ken, we're going to give you millions of dollars. You're in charge of it. Your job now is to come up with, how do we do it so that other Kens don't hate it? That's the problem to solve. It's not for you to solve. But they will.
You know what this is? It reminds me of? This is like the guy who goes to Blaze Bayley and says, "Hey, dude, do you want to replace Bruce Dickinson in Iron Maiden?" No, thanks. No, thanks. There are just some jobs you don't take.
Here's the deal. They're going to take your money. They're going to take your money when you go and see it, and they don't care if you hate it. So that's the reality. Yeah. That's the reality. I would recommend a no-name actor who's like 23 years old, who can do a spot-on Robert Englund impersonation. Yeah. And just comes in and like I said, you maybe ignore certain movies that happen, and then you can like take up some of those elements, like we were saying, the 100 Maniacs. Maybe the first reboot movie starts in 1990 and it has a backstory of the 100 Maniacs. It has some of that stuff. It just kind of picks up. I mean, we've already said 1 and 3 are really the main core. So maybe you just pick up after Dream Warriors, and or you fast forward and Patricia Arquette's in it, and it's her kids, one of the characters that didn't die, it's somehow connected to their kids. It's not for us to come up with.
I'm not saying you can't write a story that wouldn't be a decent story. I'm saying sometimes you can't recreate the iconic visual of the original because it's based on a specific actor. And that is
I'm just being an optimist. I'm not asking for more.
Yeah.
But I know they're coming. So I try to look to like who and how can they successfully pull this off. So we can let this one sleep because we'll revisit this when that movie comes out and maybe we'll do an episode about it.
All right, fair enough.
But it'll come eventually.
Well,
like
for the
it's
record,
only a matter of time.
I'm going to say, let sleeping dogs lie. Do not remake horror movies if they're good.
All right, Ken. It's time for our final episode. Our final segment of this episode. I'm going to start that over.
Okay.
If you don't mind. I'm going to... All right, Ken. It's time for our final segment of the podcast, Soundtrack to the Apocalypse. This is the debut of this new segment. In this segment, our guest is the star of his or her own film. They will be given 2 minutes to respond to as many randomly presented scenarios as possible. Ken, you will need to quickly provide the song and musical artist as background music for each presented scene. So I'm going to start a clock. When the clock starts at 2 minutes, I'm going to start presenting to you. You're going to need to unmute your mic once I start the video.
All right.
I'm going to give you a scenario. You provide the name of the song and the artist, and then we're going to go. And then in future episodes, we're going to see if somebody can beat your number of how many you answer.
Sounds good.
All right, number one. It's a bank heist. Getaway, car driver. You're the car driver. Your crew just jumped in your ride with loot. Time to fly.
Breaking the Law. Judas Priest.
Number two. Epic Viking battle scene. Grab your battle axe. It's time to slay some orcs.
Oh, fuck, dude. Pantera. Domination.
Number three, slasher movie. It's the final showdown. You won't go down without a fight.
Jesus. What's that? Nothing's gonna stop us now. I don't know. What is that? Who is that? That's my answer. This is hard.
All right. I don't know what that is, but we'll take it. No, number four, your son befriends a small alien named Spork. And the three of you have the greatest montage day in the big city, attending a ball game, ice cream, and more.
Why can't we be friends?
I'll take it. Number five, earthquakes everywhere. Dragons are rising up from the Earth's core.
That's it. Let me stand next to your fire.
Number six, you happen to stop into the wrong hillbilly bar. They don't like city boys like you. Bar fight ensues.
Boy. Redneck. Lamb of God.
Number seven, the pandemic has turned into the dawn of the zombie apocalypse. All you have to fight your way out of the city is a chainsaw and rollerblades. Final answer?
Dude, this is so hard. I haven't. That's you need to.
You got six.
You need to edit this right, man. That is really, really, really difficult.
You got six. out of my possible 24 that I wrote up. So I feel much better that I that you weren't going to exhaust my list. So
you 24 for a 2-minute segment.
Yeah, I guess if you really quick, like I said, in writing these, I kept writing really good ones at the end, so I kept having to bump them up to the beginning. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if somebody can beat your number 6.
Dude, that is a really, really hard thing to be able to come up with off the top of your head. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I don't think I'm the dullest either. But that is a challenge.
I think you did pretty good. Now we're going to ask you to reenact all of those scenes.
Exactly.
All right, man. Well, before we wrap this up, where can people check out your artwork and such, your skulls, decor?
Yeah. All the Halloween stuff that I put up is on Sculptable, SKULLPABLE. I've fine-tuned my process for my NFL skulls a little bit, so I think I got a pretty clean product on there. There's some good pictures up if people are interested in that. And I've got I'm working right now on another piece I think is going to be really cool. I'm making a skull lamp.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm real psyched about that. I hope to have that done no less than like 3-4 days. So keep watching the gram there, refreshing it or whatever it's called, and look for new content on there. Now that Halloween decor is done, I have a little bit more time to do some other art projects. So stay tuned.
Cool. Yeah, and relative to that, next time you're on, we can show some visuals of that as well.
Yeah. Cool.
And remember, for our listeners that are listening on our audio only version, this is the live video stream version on YouTube. So we record these live on YouTube on Thursdays, and then the following Monday available on all major podcasting platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcast app, whatever you listen to podcasts on, we are available there. Ken, thank you so much for being a part of today's episode.
Thank you, my brother. I love it. Thank you so much.
Everybody stay safe out there. We'll catch you on our next episode when I sit down with Nate Failhour to talk all things Van Halen and give our tribute to the great Eddie Van Halen. Thank you and good night.
Peace.